Alrighty, so today I've got a bit of a controversial one. It's going to be a list of cards that I think are a bit overrated or underrated based on kind of my own criteria and things that I pick up on in general discourse. Naturally, a topic like this will have a lot of disagreement kind of built into it because it's basically me disagreeing with what I think is the general consensus on a lot of these cards. But as always, my spin on this is going to be to talk about competitive implications of the cards that I mention here, where they may be useful, where they may not be useful. So although this is a bit of a sensationalism style video, I still hope to bring in some competitive knowledge and insight to the discussion. Naturally, feel free to let me know where you disagree with me because I'm basically letting all of you know where I'm disagreeing. And also to say that just because I think something is overrated doesn't mean I wouldn't play it. In fact, a lot of the cards on that list I think are cards I would play. I just think they generally tend to be ones that are either overplayed, overrepresented, or get too much credit for what they're doing when they are played. And likewise with the underrated stuff, it's not that I'm telling you you need to start jamming 3 of all of these cards in all your decks. In a lot of cases, it's just things that I think need to be explored more or get a little more space in deck building. All right, before we get started, please take a moment, subscribe to the channel. Really climbing up there. The next goal is 3K and hope to hit that pretty soon. So get to clicking. All right, we're going to start with underrated. So I'm going to go with 10 through 6 on the underrated list. I'll skip over to overrated, 10 through 6, and then we'll switch back to underrated. So at number 10 in the underrated column, I've got this Frozen Carbonite. Basically, it's yellow hard removal. It's as hard removal as you can get in yellow. The unit is going to be exhausted immediately and stay that way. So it's basically out of commission unless it has some kind of ability it can use when it's exhausted, which is very few. Big limitation on this is it's not hit leaders, but I think it'd be kind of insane if it did. Naturally, this is trends towards a more controlling card, but I remember a simpler time where we were jamming entrenched in our control decks, especially the unit light control decks, just to kind of like stall out units until we like super laser blast or something. I think Frozen and Carbonite can do a pretty good imitation of that, although it does not hit leaders, but it hits the units much harder, right? Entrenched had a major drawback in that once you played it, you essentially could not compete with that arena at all. Additionally, I think Frozen and Carbonite can start making its way into decks that do not play blue because it's giving yellow an access to a removal tool that it wasn't generally getting. A place I might look at and fitting because of the artwork and kind of the scene being described is a Jabba deck, like a Jabba yellow deck. Yeah, so it's green yellow. Tends to be a very removal light color pair, and I think Frozen and Carbonite can definitely help out there, right? This also hits space, right? I know it's weird, but it hits vehicles, it hits spaceships, so it really is pretty flexible. It's an upgrade, and although I'm not like so horrified of playing upgrades right now, it is something you need to consider that there might be a little more upgrade removal. Upgrade removal in general, I think, is actually kind of overrated right now. I didn't list upgrade removal as an overrated in this list, but it is kind of my thought right now that most of the upgrade removal is not actually very good unless it's like aggression, which is a very good card that also doubles as upgrade removal. But yeah, so Frozen Carbonite I think can start getting squeezed into some more decks, and people can start taking a closer look at this card. All right, number 9, I got Crosshair. So I don't think I've ever seen a deck with this card, but like, except for like a couple times, it actually kind of impressed me every time I saw it. Look, it's slow, it's a little dirtily, it's not immense power level, but 6 health at 4 cost does lend itself to not really being easily removed. And then it's got this persistent, annoying ability. It's got a way to sink resources into. So think maybe, just a thought, like what decks tend to have some unused resources sometimes. Boba Fett, maybe, who generates a lot of resources. So this gives you a little bit of a resource sink, especially in matchups where you might be card light, like against red hero decks that are trying to rip your hand to shreds. Another place I think this could be really cool is with Kylo, where he can free buff this to a 4-power unit with his ability, and then you can snipe something without taking any damage back. So I'd look at like a Kylo green shell. It again, 4 cost, 6 health has been, in my testing, a good break point. It is not easily removed. It can't be takedowned, right? As in terms of like 1-for-1 removal, most units at that cost, actually, like there's not a single 4-cost unit that has 6 power, right? So it's not really dying to 1 shot, right? I'm not going to say there's no, I don't think there is, but just in case someone finds one, I retract that there is no, because I cannot confirm that 100% off the top of my head right now. But yes, Crosshair, I don't think this is a game breaker. I just think it's a card that needs to start getting looked at a little more. All right, number 8, a card that I previewed during preview season, Mercenary Gunship. Now, this card does see some play. I just think it probably needs to see a little more play. This ability, the steal, I've seen it happen like 0 times. I just think this is basically Kylo's tie that costs 5 cents. Most of the time, that's basically what this is. Kylo's tie is a 3/2 space unit that costs $25. I think you can just play Mercenary Gunship. It's basically the same card. This actually has Underworld, so I think if you're playing McClunky in your deck, you might just play this over Kylo's tie. But yeah, I don't think this drawback has been particularly significant. I think a lot of decks could just use a 3/2 space unit, whether they are controlling decks that are just need to like have space presence to trade with some units, like the A-Wings or the TIE Phantoms, where you just like have to have a space unit to kill it before it gets buffed. But yeah, like even aggressive decks, right? 3 power for 2 in the space is good. And this has a very low impact negative downside on it. I just think this card is really good. All right, number 7, Boba Fett's armor. So this is a weird one to include because I think a lot of people are actually quite high on this, but I still see I see this as being slightly underrated in the sense that it's not played in all Boba decks. And I think I've gotten to the point where I just want to include it. Not because I think its power level is obscene. It's more that I think it gives the deck a slightly different angle and makes it slightly more unpredictable and slightly more difficult to counter. Boba in general, like a big thing about countering him is to one-shot him or to like get him off the board as soon as possible. And this gives you a way to mitigate that. So if someone's very tunneled into trying to set something up to take him out really quickly, this can help. It's a bit awkward sometimes to squeeze into the Boba flip turn because of the resource breakdown, right? You often want to play like a 5 cost first to like remove something, but then you only have 1 resource left. Once you flip Boba, you have to attack before you can actually get the Boba's armor on him. Otherwise, you need to flip and play Boba's armor, but then you're not generating the 1 free resource unless you had some way to kill something for between like 0 and 3 resources or 0 and 4 resources before you flip. There are ways to get the whole 8 on that turn. It's just much more difficult with Boba Fett's armor. And I don't know, this one I was like not sure I should include on this list because I know a lot of people are very high on this card. I just think it's worth acknowledging that the power level here isn't just like, oh, Boba invincible. It's more that it gives the deck a different avenue of attack that is different from its normal like play unit bounce buff, like surprise strike, cunning, close out the game with fire spray. Like this is just different, right? You're gonna play this and like some deck might not be able to like prevent Boba from doing 12 to 18 damage to you. So yeah, look at it, consider it a little more. It also has the item tag, and that's going to come into play in another card on this list, and I think it's a big reason I did include it is because of that. I think it goes very well with something else that we'll talk about. All right, number 6, Underrated, is a card that I had in my top 10 list. It's Lone Pike. Now, I've started to see this creep into a lot more villain blue decks. I just think it needs more credit. This guy's a beast. It's a good ambusher with energy conversion lab. It's got the 6 health on the 4 resource, so like just playing this flat on the board for 4 is actually really good. The shield upside on attack trigger has been way more impactful than even I thought it was going to be. There are great ways to mitigate the downside, like the cross arena, throwing shields on things that don't matter. You're in the villain blue color that can deal with shielded units quite easily with their removal. It works really well with Kira herself, a leader that I think pairs the best with the blue-green shell in general, in that her flip can remove the shields if needed. Her flip will also heal everything that has a shield to full health, so Lone Pike could end up taking some damage, then getting shielded, then getting healed to full. It's just been really good, and yeah, I think it's the strong ambush, and I haven't even gotten to the smuggle. It's got basically the most competitive smuggle cost in the game for a 4/6 unit, only taxing 1. It gives these blue decks much more longevity and much more beef to kind of like just play with later in the game, where they end up in top deck situations. And, you know, there were games where you would lose when you got to that point, because any deck is going to have a group of cards that they don't want to draw late in the game. Blue-green is no different than any other deck, and when you draw your resupply and your Inferno 4 on turn 9, but you've got this guy in your resource row, you're feeling much better. Lone Pike's great, and you should play Lone Pike. All right, let's get into overrated. We're going to go 10 through 6 here. So Cobb Vanth, I'm saying he's overrated because I think I overrated him. I thought this card was going to be a lot better, and I basically don't play this in any deck anymore. I think 3/2 is an embarrassment of a stat line at 3 costs. I actually kind of think it's an embarrassment of a stat line at 2 costs right now. Like, I don't play 3/2s that cost 2 unless they have a very significant upside on the ground. In space, it's a little different, but on the ground, there's just like, you know, Crafty Smuggler. You like never want to play something like that. There's Death Troopers in Villain. It's just a real liability to have 2. Additionally, 2 drops in general don't feel super impactful. I think the best things you can do with Cobb Vanth are getting like utility 2s, like Cloud Rider with the Ambush, Bazina Tal. But overall, he's not the built-in 2-for-1 that I thought he was going to be, because, you know, his front side just isn't a full card worth of value. At 3 cost, a 3/2 is not a card and not good enough on rate to make this guy be a 2-for-1. I just don't think he's that great. I don't think he's terrible. I think he might fit in some shells, but I've been very unimpressed in my initial testing with him. All right, number 9, Lurking TIE Fighter, TIE Phantom. So this is a good card. I actually play this card in some decks. I just think it's like wildly it's like wildly overrated right now, like propping up entire deck archetypes that I don't think are actually tier 1, let's say. Like, I think you can play this. I think this is much more of a utility card. I think it's much more of a role player in good decks. I don't think the idea of just like, I'm gonna buff this and win is gonna do much other than catch some unprepared people off guard. It is still a 2/2 space unit that costs 3, and decks should be playing space units at this point that can kill this immediately. If they're not, they're doing something wrong. So yeah, it's a good card. I play it. I have one of these in my Boba Yellow deck because I think it's like the 4th 7th Fleet Defender, and it's nice sometimes to just have like more space presence. But what I'm not trying to do is just all in on this card. And even if you're playing very space heavy decks, which can be good, I think your plan A shouldn't just be to tunnel into this card. I think it's gonna be a little bit of a trap. All right, number 8, Dr. Pershing. So Pershing's a card that I consider sometimes to play in villain control decks, whether they are like more unit based with green usually, or more event based with like yellow. He's not terrible. It's just that he's not great either, right? For him to generate value, he needs to draw at least 2 cards. That's going to take the turn you play him, the following turn, and the turn after to accomplish. At that point, you've played Mission Briefing, which we know is okay, right? It's not very good. On top of that, he's not worth a card himself, right? So when he is killed, he's not trading with anything. So you're giving up board advantage to play him. There are matchups where I think that is fine. Those will typically be more controlling mirrors. But in a lot of other places, I think you are spending a lot of time, a lot of actions to not affect the board at all. And in many cases, I think there might be better options for pure card advantage, whether or not it's smuggle or just generating 2-for-1s with your good cards, as opposed to just try to like go off with this guy. You know, there are the dream scenarios where they just can't deal with him and he draws you 3 or 4 cards. I've never seen that happen. Like, I think most people will just hit him for 3 with one of their units on like the second turn, and you'll get your 2 cards. It'll take you 3 turns to do it, and they will have gotten a board advantage because they'll play a unit that you couldn't interact with. And will he be good in, if like that floor, if that's okay, like it might be okay, right? You get 2 cards, you lose some board advantage. Maybe there's some matchups where that's good. I am not sold. I'm also like not sold. Like, I think I might still end up squeezing like one of this into a deck. He might be a sideboard card in like attrition matchups, but I think he's just getting a little overplayed right now. Number 7 is A New Adventure. This card's cool and fun. I just don't think it's great most of the time. I think it's like a nice fun of. I think it can definitely catch some people. There are definitely scenarios where it's good, right? We know like playing it with Fire Spray to deal an extra 5 is a strong play if you can squeeze that into a curve. You have to remember that this exhausts the units, right? So Fire Spray comes in ready, but like the units that don't come in ready, to get full value of this card, you need to attack with them first. So then you're setting yourself up for a situation where you might not even be able to play the New Adventure anymore if the unit gets removed. It's very limiting, right? It needs very specific scenarios to be good. There are a decent amount of them. I think this card is certainly a flex option in double yellow decks. I just don't think it's core to the archetype. And there's a lot of cards that fit that kind of rule right now, especially in mono yellow. There are tons and tons of like weird utility options in those decks. Like even Boba's Armor might be one of them. Bazine, Final Showdown, if you want to go that way. McClunky. There's more. There's just a bunch of stuff you can include, and you can't include all of it lest your deck becomes way less consistent. So New Adventure definitely will reduce some consistency in your deck by giving it a different angle, and that's okay, and it's playable. It's just, I think, a little overrated. And number 6 on overrated, we got Concord Dawn Interceptors. This card's fine. I think certainly in some slower blue mid-rangey decks, it's okay. Its 1 attack on the front end just isn't attractive at all to me. It really just is a wall. You're not doing much other than trying to block some damage, which means your opponent will get time to kind of figure out how they want to deal with this, because this itself is not posing any threat to their life or to their units. It just sits there and waits for something to kill it. And because of that, I think its floor tends to be pretty low. Now, can it brick wall? Can it prevent a bunch of damage if your opponent goes like A-Wing Red 3? Actually, in that case, not really, because the A-Wing just kills it, right? So that was a bad example. A-Wing, I guess, right? Like, I just don't know how often this is going to give you more than a card's worth of value. I know Ray can buff it to a 2/5 and then a 3/6 if they want to spend a lot of time messing with the Concord Dawn. It's also very susceptible to bounce if it starts getting buffed. So against like Boba decks, which do like you do like having Sentinel buffs against their like 7 fleets and Phantoms if they're playing it, and like Fire Spray. I've just been like not super impressed with this. I think it's certainly an option, right? We're in the point where I'm like saying these cards are overrated. They're not unplayable. Like, I still think this is very playable. I think it belongs in some decks. It's just, I think, getting maybe played too much. All right, we're back to underrated. So at number 5, I've got IG-11. I've seen this card very little. I think this and another card I'll talk about are ECL. They're like ECL best friends. I think it's just a really good one and an option that a lot of ECL decks should start looking at, because it hits for 6, first of all, which is huge at 5 cost, and then it can do that 2-for-1. So I don't know if you remember, like, Zeb from set 1. It's not really a card we talk about anymore. He turned out not being fantastic, but he was like that similar, like, ECL or bust kind of unit. I think IG just does it mostly better as long as you can trigger the on attack. So what are some leaders that do that? There's Bosk, there's Vader. They both have built-in pings, and they're in red, right? Like, you need to be able to play Energy Conversion Lab for my kind of theory here to work. I think you can play this in Kylo, potentially, in like a Kylo green deck. There tends to just be ways, like, things take damage a lot of the time, and then IG coming in, killing something big, killing something small, and staying in play is quite good. And I think you should start looking at this card a little more in your green Energy Conversion Lab decks, and even maybe move to an Energy Conversion Lab if you weren't already playing it, by including this and having a really good target for it. All right, at number 4, I've got Remnant Reserves, a card that basically 0 people talk about. I think it's pretty good. 4 cost to potentially draw 3 cards. The math is important, right? It's only getting units, so you need to have a decent amount of units. At about 16 events, now I ran this calculation a few days ago, so I'm off the top of my head, don't quote me on this, but at 16 events in the deck, it was about a 68% to hit 3 units, which is actually pretty good for a 16 event deck. At 12 events, that I think it jumped closer to like over 80% to hit 3 units. In both these cases, like at 16 events, you were like 95% to hit 2 units. So that's pretty good, right? Like, especially if we're talking about Pillage being a decent card, because at 2-for-1s, well, this 3-for-1s in the other direction, or, you know, if you're not a super unit dense deck, it could end up being just a 2-for-1. So like they pillage, you Remnant Reserves, you're back to even. This is a kind of card that I think might just make way more sense than Dr. Pershing. You're just gonna like do it all at once in the matchups where that's good. I think that's just gonna be, you're just gonna like do it and be done with it, right? You're not gonna need 4 turns to draw 3 cards like you do with Dr. Pershing, where you like play them and then the 3 following turns you have to draw a card with him. As long as you're playing a bunch of units, I think Remnant Reserves makes sense as a sideboard card in some grindy matchups. And just make sure to run your calculation before you start jamming this into a bunch of decks. And remember, it gets only units, but it does get any units. So if you say like, oh, why not just play Grand Moff Tarkin and your green villain decks to get the units? Well, he only gets Imperials. So he is way more limited in his scope. All right, number 3, Commission. So I promised you a card that was going to mention items, and this one is it. I was very high on Recruit in set 1, and I think Commission is mostly better than Recruit, obviously in only very specific decks, right? Recruit gets any unit. This only gets Bounty Hunters, items, and transports. But let's talk about what that means and what decks you might want to play this in. Let's go first to Boba. So Boba green. Bounty Hunters. It plays Bounty Hunters. You got the Boba unit. You got Greedo. You got potentially Bosk. If you're doing 4-Lam Zuckuss, those are Bounty Hunters, right? You got a decent amount of Bounty Hunters that you can pop into your hand with this. Items. Talked about Boba's armor. Dark Saber is an item. Fallen Lightsaber is an item. Jedi Lightsaber. I think the item part here is actually kind of like the real winner, because I think it makes this turn, like you can start playing those cards as kind of like one-offs in your deck, because you can now search them up in exactly the moment that you might need them. Those cards tend to be very high upside, but also high downside, because they're not really great in a lot of game states or in a lot of matchups. Commission helps smooth that out, helping you fetch them when they're going to be really good and not worry about them too much when they're not. Transport, well, that's Fire Spray is a transport, right? So that's why we say Boba green is probably the first place you might want to look at Commission. I thought Recruit was correct in Boba Green in set 1, and it ideally was getting you a finisher, something like Fire Spray or Darth Vader. Now, Commission cannot get you the Vaders and Mauls, but it can get you the Fire Spray, and it can get you a bunch of the Bounty Hunters. It can smooth out your draws, and it can get you the item, which is, I think, a pretty high upside. Additionally, it's got Smuggle, right? So this is a built-in 2-for-1 late in the game, or it's like a 1-for-0, actually, right? It's not costing you a card, and I think that's a pretty high upside. Another place I think you can look at this is maybe with Bosk, because it's another deck that will play Bounty Hunters. Punishing one is a transport. The items, right? Like, do you just throw in a lightsaber like as a one-off, or a dark saber as a one-off just so you can go get it? I think you probably would if you wanted to play Commission, because again, it gives you an angle attack, a card that can kind of search up the card when it's going to be really good. So Commission, definitely look at it. It's kind of narrow just because, you know, Bounty Hunter item transport, you have to like make sure those are key parts of your deck. But the two things I just mentioned, I think they are key parts too. So I think you should look to play Commission in those decks. All right, number 2, Underrated, Wild Rancor. Now, this one's very niche. I think it's basically only a Mono Red Han card, but I think it's one of the best cards in Mono Red Han, and I actually see Mono Red Hans not even play this card, which is, I think, wild to me because, look, pun. But anyway, this card's awesome. It's like Poe, right? For 5 costs, he's a 6/6 that actually has like a more immediate board impact than Poe, and doesn't rely on the energy conversion lab thing, right? So he's got Overwhelm, right? He can be played at 6 and have like a basically indestructible health pool. Wild Rancor is fantastic. It's one of the main reasons I think Mono Red Han's like a competitive deck. I think it is a very good deck, and it's on the back of like having extra chunky guys in that mid-range area, whether they are Poe, Wrecker, Wild Rancor, that kind of fills that group. And I think Rancor, it just needs to be played more. Unfortunately, I can't really advocate for it outside of that, because I think if you're playing it for 6 in other mono red decks, it's just probably too slow. But it's just really, really good in that mono red Han deck, so I kind of wanted to include it here. All right, number 1, underrated card, Kylo Ren. Why is he here? Well, he's here because of Energy Conversion Lab. So, you know, I think that card, Energy Conversion Lab, happens to be a pretty good card and a card that you should build around in a lot of decks. And what does Kylo do in Energy Conversion Lab? Well, he ambushes for 8, which is an obscene number, and it one-shots a lot of relevant leaders. Boba, right? So that's the main thing here. I am not playing this in like blue-red Rey. I am not playing this in like red-blue Kylo. I'm playing this with Energy Conversion Lab because an 8 ambush to have access to is massive, and then you've got the fallback plan of, hey, giant chunky unit that is hard to remove. It's not plan A for him, but it's not a terrible plan B. The buff in itself, right, if he's killing something that doesn't have 8 health, you can throw that 2 power onto another unit. Bonus points if it's not a villainous unit. It also gets a little experience. But yeah, I think this card's quite good. I would play it in red-green decks like Darth Vader, Bosk if you're playing that with green, Kylo Ren, again, like red-green villain, right? Whatever villain red leaders you're looking at, if you're pairing them with green, you play the Energy Conversion Lab, and you play the Kylo, and you've got a one-shot tool for a lot of leaders, which is pretty cool. All right, let's get to the last 5 overrated cards. This is where the spice really gets going. Number 5, I've got Hotshot DL44 Blaster, which is a card I was extremely high on, and I have cut from most of my decks. It just didn't end up having enough room for it, and it's good. It's just like not as good as Surprise Strike, and I don't know how many of those cards you can fit into decks right now, how many of these situational things. Remember, this is primarily a yellow card, right? The smuggle is the good part about this card. I still think it's a decent one. I still could see it getting like played in some lists and like there being enough space for it It's just that 3 cost for +2 and an attack didn't end up being as impressive as I thought it might be. It doesn't cost a card technically, but it costs a lot of resources. So as such, I think it's a little overrated. I think it needs to be trimmed a little more. I'm not sure it'll end up making final copies of a lot of decks. All right, number 4, Triple Dark Raid. So in the same vein that I talked about the TIE Phantom, I think Triple Dark Raid is also getting way too much credit as a card that's carrying these space decks. I think it's a fine card and a fine thing to have access to. But again, I do not think this like all-in strategy is going to work once people catch onto it. I think people are already getting more prepared for it. I myself have become more prepared for it, and I've realized that I'm able to counter this stuff much more easily than at first because I know it's happening and I know what to look out for. Triple Dark Raid is still limited by the fact that you need a lot of vehicles in your deck because it's only searching 7. The best card for it by far to get out is Ruthless Raider. So that also puts it into another color pair. I think overall it's good, and I think these decks can still exist, but I largely want to suggest that you don't think so much that it's a Triple Dark Raid deck and more use Triple Dark Raid as kind of an alternate option when the board presents itself that way, and to just not like overrate its effect on the game so much. All right, number 3, overrated, Tech. So Tech's fine. Like, he's okay. The Tech DJ combo thing, I think, is whatever. It's a nice thing to have access to in these Han decks, the old man Han, but not something that I have grown particularly scared of. Tech as a whole is like a nice idea to be like, hey, I've got infinite cards in grindy matchups, but then we remember he's a 2/5 and he just dies a lot of the time. And then, yeah, maybe he draws you 1 card out of your resource row if you're able to like play him and have like enough resources to play something, or you get a turn to like use him. Certainly seems like a decent card to have in like a one-off in a lot of hero decks, just to like in top deck wars, right? You've ripped their hand apart, they've ripped your hand apart. Now it's like we draw 2 and I've got a tech and 9 resources in my resource row, and if I can like play the tech and they can't immediately kill him, I might be able to just like snowball a card advantage. That's cool. But he's still like a 2/5, right? And he's not a great early game play because again, he's a 2/5 and you're not really gonna be able to use his ability at all early in the game. So yeah, I mostly just think this card is pretty overrated. Number 2, Crate Dragon. This one's weird because I put this in my top 10 list, and then like I saw its price, or I'm like seeing its price, and it's like the first or second most expensive card in the set, and I'm like, I don't get that at all. So maybe I overrate, like, in a way, I feel like I both am overrating it and underrating it at the same time. It's a nice card. It's a good card. It's a good finisher for red decks, especially into control decks. Mainly decks that didn't have access to things like Relentless in those matchups. It's nice. It is not like a game breaker, I don't think. Right now, I'm not seeing it as like the trump card that just like comes down and completely decimates a game and no one can ever deal with. I've had this played against me in control games where I would like super laser blast and take 8 and still win the game, right? Like, it's still a hefty resource cost. It is still removable by a bunch of things that cost less than it, right? Power of the Dark Side, Fell the Dragon, Rival's Fall, Vanquish. Killing it on the ground with units is hard. And the Crate Dragon is a good card. Like, I still would play this card, usually out of sideboards into control decks. But I guess this one's on the list mainly because of its price. I just don't understand how this could be considered one of the most expensive cards in the set right now, when I see it as like one or two of sideboard card in some matchups. Maybe like a one-off main deck card in some matchups too, right? Like it doesn't seem like you're gonna be playing 3 of these in every red deck, or I mean, maybe he is being played as a 3 of in every red deck, and that's why he's so expensive. But yeah, that's why I've got it here. All right, ready for number 1. Bam, Rivals Fall, super overrated. I mean, oh man, this is Vanquish and it costs 1 more. I understand that it hits leaders, and that is an upside, and I would probably play this card over Vanquish if I was going to play this card. And I might play this card a little bit in some control decks, but this is not a game breaker, and this is not making leaders unplayable, certain leaders unplayable. It is not making certain strategies unplayable. This is an incredibly heavy price to pay for a 1-for-1 removal, and it is good in some very specific situations, but there are plenty of better ways to kill leaders in this game. You know, like, they all existed before. It's not like set 1 we were like playing upgrades and making these giant unkillable machines. Like, even Churret wasn't considered a tier 1 deck in set 1, and Rivals Fall didn't exist, right? What was killing Churret? A bunch of other things, and all those things still exist right now. We are not in like I'm gonna play like a Dark Saber on every leader and just try to kill you with that. That's not happening right now. Like, I don't understand why this is being played as much as it is. I certainly think it can be played in some decks. It's certainly an option. It is an option I consider sometimes in that removal pool, right? There's a very large pool of removal in blue. You've got Power of the Dark Side, Takedown, Fell the Dragon, Make an Opening, Super Laser Blast. Vanquish, mostly not anymore, because I do concede that if I was going to play Vanquish, I would probably play Rivals Fall. However, Vanquish is better than Rivals Fall 95% of the time, right? The only time it's not is when you're targeting a leader with it. But these blue decks tend to be able to kill leaders. I don't remember that being their issue ever. Like, even when you were playing Krennic, who was a 2/7, I don't remember leaders being some like magical mythical beast that couldn't be defeated by normal combat means or other removal. So I'm pretty sure Rivals Fall is solving an issue that didn't even really exist, and it's certainly a tool you should consider as a backup plan for scenarios where they are able to sneak some giant upgrade on a leader, or like a Boba's armor. But you know, I'll come back a little bit to Kira too, because she's got like built-in leader removal with her flip. So in often cases, I'm not even sure I need this card in that deck. Like, if I want an answer to really large units like Crate Dragon or you know, Mauls or Poes or Wreckers, like Fell the Dragon seems to be the best fit for that slot. Rivals Fall, yeah, I think this card is actually severely overrated and will not need to see nearly as much play as it is getting right now. All right, so you've got my disagreements. You heard from me what I think some of the cards that are maybe getting a little underplayed or underappreciated, some of the cards that I think are maybe overplayed or overappreciated. I'd like to hear from you what you think. And again, please, you get a chance, click that subscribe button. It helps out a ton. And until next time, take care.